the departments of anthropology and zoology at the University of Alberta. He spent 2 years at McGill and 3 years at Harvard University doing postdoctoral research. Since 1990, he has served as an honorary lecturer in the Department of Zoology at Makerere University, Uganda. And since 1995, he has been an associate scientist with the Wildlife Conservation Society. Colin also served as a faculty member in zoology at the University of Florida for 11 years and returned to McGill in 2004 to take up professorship in the Department of Anthropology and McGill School of Environment, where he holds a Canada Research Chair Tier 1 position in primate ecology and conservation, is a Killam Research Fellow, and is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He has conducted research in Kibale National Park in Uganda for almost 25 years and is interested in the roles of disease, nutrition, and stress in determining primate abundance and how to best forge a harmony between the needs of local people and conservation. Most importantly, Colin is a regular member at the Centre de Recherche en Éthique, where I work as a coordinator. So I won't even start with his publication, as he has hundreds of them. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Colin Chapman.
Thank you very much. Does this sound okay for everybody? People are nodding. Okay, so basically, as we just kind of heard, I come from a varied background. When I went up for tenure, people said either I was incredibly diverse or just totally scattered. And I kind of like the totally scattered point personally. So I come up through an anthropology background and a zoology background. And so this talk I'm going to give today is something I've always wanted to talk about, mostly to make my anthropologists annoyed, because anthropology really believes that humans are very, very different. So I want to talk about why do we think that humans are so different. So I want to kind of give this talk, and there is no answer to this question. I'm going to present to you kind of what I think are my perspectives. And pause. Basically, I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, which is I'm a primate ecologist. I'm a behavioral ecologist. I do a lot of work in conservation, but I spend a lot of time in the field. And I really spend a lot of time looking at kind of ecology, why animals are eating particular things, what diseases are attacking them. I look at blood samples, I describe new diseases, that sort of thing. So that's my bias. That's where I'm going to come in and I'm going to talk about it from kind of that sort of perspective. And I really want to ask the question is, why do we want to think humans are different? People have been trying kind of for centuries to state that humans are unique and superior to animals. But our definitions keep changing. So I want to talk about some of those definitions. And I want to talk about why those definitions are important. So if our definitions keep changing, we have to think about what those definitions really matter. So we can compare them to a couple other definitions as just one. Other definitions that have changed, so maybe it's time to think about the kind of the difference between humans and animals. The U.S. Declaration of Independence basically said that only white male property owners are deemed adequately endowed to include in the category of personhood. I don't know about you. I can think about over half of you. Sorry, you don't count. I don't count because I don't have property. So our definitions are changing. If our definitions are changing, maybe we should start kind of thinking these sorts of perspectives. That's my perspective, kind of my take on kind of these sorts of things. Now, of course, non-white females are included, so we have to think about what that means. And things have really been changing dramatically in the last year with the whole Me Too movement, which I'm really kind of interested in. So let's kind of back up in time. So basically, in the 17th century, the philosophers have stated things like, Only people were creatures of reason linked to the mind of God, while animals are merely machines of the flesh. So that was what was stated, 300, 400 years ago. And we can kind of think of that as kind of a baseline maybe, or a way of thinking of things. Or we can think about that as what we thought before, and we can think about it as, should we be thinking of change? Should we be thinking about what's kind of the motivation of changes? So basically, Nicholas, not sure I can pronounce the last name, one of the kind of the followers of this kind of school of thought said, animals eat without pleasure, cry without pain, grow without knowing it, and they desire nothing, fear nothing, and know nothing. So that was the perspective in the 17th century. How many people have a dog? Okay, a few. Cats? Even more. So basically, if you have a cat and a dog, or a dog, you basically know that that state, I think you know, my perspective would be is that basically those statements are wrong. So if those statements are wrong, the previous slide says it's so important to think about statements like this and how they might be wrong, how we might be changing our perspective and how we deal with important issues. We can kind of think about that. So let's kind of go back to basically thinking about some of the definitions. So in 1833, basically it was stated that man is a tool-using animal. Without tools, he is nothing. With tools, he is all. That definition basically followed for basically about, over a century, 150 years. And people believed that definition. Man was the tool user. That is an anthropological statement. You can think about whether or not you believe in it, kind of maybe pause for a second and think about what that might mean. Sure, we use tools. A bunch of people are on computers. Those are nice tools. People are using pens, nice tools. We're in this beautiful building. Are those things that make us unique? And I'm going to kind of explore that a little bit. But birds use tools. Secretary birds break open eggs with rocks. Is that tool use? Sure, it's a tool. There are all sorts of more elaborate kind of descriptions of tool use. So the Caledonian crows use a bunch of different tools to extract food when they're foraging. That's all tool use. If you go to primates, which I must admit is my bias, capuchin monkeys use tools. They use it to hammer open things. They use it to process foods. So if they don't want to touch a fruit that has sticky kind of things that get into your hands, they use tools to avoid that. They use tools. And, as you might not be too surprised, chimpanzees use tools. So chimpanzees use tools in that sense, because chimpanzees basically are able to open nuts, extract foods they wouldn't be able to extract. They use sticks to extract termites from termite mounds. We've been describing how they use sticks to basically extract honey from subterranean bee nests. They use sticks to mark where the bee nest is. They leave it literally a flag to say, okay, well, next time we come by, let's remember this is still here. So they use tools. Chimpanzees also use tools to modify tools. And if you're in the chimpanzee world, which I'm not, basically they describe things being very elaborately. So a meta tool is a tool used to modify a tool. So at the very top, you can see a chimpanzee processing some sort of, processing particular nuts they have to basically crack. But they've used a tool to modify a tool. So here is basically the anvil. So if you want to take a nut and crack it, if you take a nut and just basically crack it without putting something under it, it goes into the ground. So you have to put a rock, an anvil, take another tool, so a hammer, and crack the nut against the anvil. This anvil was rocking. So the chimpanzee used a tool to modify the tool. So all these things are basically tool use. So we defined man, which at that time is how we talked about it. We didn't talk about it as humans or men and women. We talked about it as man by that sort of definition. I kind of like this one because it picks on McGill University. William Osler, basically in Science in 1981, who somehow is associated with McGill, basically said the desire to make medicine is perhaps to take medicine is perhaps the greatest feature which distinguishes humans from animals. Well, that kind of definition died in the 1970s, early 80s, when a friend of mine, basically Mike Huffman, showed that chimpanzees are really quite adept at using medicines. They kind of find medicines. I have no idea how. This is the use of Aspilia, which is basically gets rid of intestinal worms. There's two different types of tools or medicines these guys use. They use medicines that have chemicals in it, and they use medicines that are structurally designed to get rid of worms. So by structurally designed, I'm talking about they basically, and I've seen this, it's really cool. They take a leaf and they basically, with their tongue, which I could never do, and their lip, they roll the leaf into a tube. So I can't even imitate it. Basically, they're using their lower lip. They roll the leaf into a tube, and they basically go, and they swallow the whole leaf without chewing. The leaves are, I can give you a bunch of species names, but the leaves basically have all these spines on them. And if you look the next day or 18 hours later, basically you'll find a bunch of different intestinal worms hooked to that leaf. So it's basically putting a kind of a spiny sponge through your intestine to get rid of get rid of worms. So it's pretty cool, actually. How many of you have had worms? One, good stuff. Well, actually, all you do have different types of nematodes. Sorry, everybody. But, it's something nice to get rid of. A researcher from basically Harvard in the 1946, he's kind of a famous researcher, said that no animal up a tree can imitate a culture. Let's try to think about how we want to define a culture. What is culture? So we can talk about it being something learned from one generation to the next. If we do that, then there's lots of animals that have culture. If we want to define it more narrowly, it's pretty hard to define it to be something that just humans have. So it's something to think about. How do we define these things? Are we unique in having culture? If we wanted to talk to probably 90% of the cultural anthropologists today in North America, they would say only humans have culture. The most kind of famous thing people have talked about is the fact that we have kind of elaborate language. And so we can talk, we can communicate ideas, we can communicate ideas between generations. And yes, it's a pretty cool thing we do. But language is often claimed to separate humans from other animals. But people, are they unique, or is this a matter of degree? I would argue it's probably a matter of degree. Gorillas, so this is Coco the gorilla, had 1,000 words that he could use in sign language. Coco gorilla just died, actually, if you wanted to know. Chimpanzees, so far, they haven't done so well as Coco, basically 350 words. There wasn't so many people who are dog lovers or dog owners, but dogs basically can have over 1,222 words that they can comprehend. I could tell my dog, I'm totally biased here, my dog is really great. I can tell my dog phrases, and he knows what the phrase means. Maybe he knows it as just a sound that goes together, but we're not, in my opinion, unique in this. We're basically kind of using something that is an extension of what was before. we often compare things and we say, okay, how many words can a dog speak? Or how many words can a chimpanzee speak? That's totally a wrong sorts of comparison because they don't have the vocal capacity to actually do it. They don't have the anatomy to do it. Are we unique in what makes us bad? So some philosophers have basically said humans are very unique because we can destroy more of the habitat. We have kind of more abilities to do that. This is a statement basically in 2013. Jane Goodall said, the part that always shocked me was the intercommunity violence among chimpanzees. The patrols and the vicious, I can't remember the wording, basically kind of the vicious attacks between kind of communities is what kind of she was really, really shocked about. Let me just skip the rest of the talk, the words, and let's just show you the video, I hope. Can you hear that? Okay, second. Can you turn it up back there? I could actually just describe it, so no problem. Basically, these are chimpanzees going on a border patrol. Or I might not have to. Okay. Yeah. No. The patrol moves off. Yep. The attack is on. Okay, so hopefully. So this is a video of basically an attack of one community against another. As they leave their core zone, the patrol goes silent, occasionally stopping to listen. So I've done this. I've followed these guys, and they kept looking after me and it's going, shh, shh. I'm sure they were trying to make me shut up. An unfamiliar shape called raises attention. Not far away, their neighbors are feeding in the fig tree, oblivious to the approaching danger. The patrol moves off with a sense of purpose. The attack is on. Several males corner an angry female. It's a ferocious attack, and she's lucky to escape with her life. Okay, the males basically do these very, very purposeful patrols. They basically go in almost single file. They basically are extremely quiet. As I kind of implied, I was following them. So they turn around and look at me, and it's obvious that my interpretation is that they're basically saying, please be quiet. Please would be a nice word. And they're basically going for these attacks. If they find a female, they'll beat the female up. If If they wanted to kill that female, they would have. If they find a male, they often kill the male. So they're very, very violent, very aggressive attacks, just like often basically humans do. So there's also kind of lots of evidence that animals do things that we don't really understand why. So there's evidence that animals doing kind of things that doing what humans do for which is basically hard to think of the kind of evolutionary pressure that would lead to that behavior. So there's pretty good evidence that some animals do things that are for aesthetics, and I'll talk about morality in a minute. So those are two paintings. One is by chimpanzee, one is by human. You can say they're both bad, you can say they're both good. You figure out which one's which. Two more. One's by chimpanzee, one's by human. The chimpanzee, when he finishes the painting, will stop. You take it back the next day and say, paint some more, he will not do it, or she will not do it. So basically, it says that they're done. And the next two images basically show you which ones are which. I'm not an art critic, so I'm not going to talk about kind of what their values are, but it suggests that they like to see things that are pretty. They like to define things, which they kind of think are interesting aesthetic objects. And when they finish, they're finished. You can criticize my statements, sure, but if you basically compare a human and a chimpanzee in the same thing in a very observational approach, would you come up with different conclusions? There's a bunch of different animals that like to paint. Some of these animals are trained. So I'm not going to talk about which ones are trained, which are not. An elephant can make a really beautiful painting of an elephant if it's trained to do so. So again, there's evidence of animals doing what humans do, for which it's hard to think of an evolutionary selection pressure leading to that behavior. It's things like empathy and mourning. So these are the next two images are basically kind of short little videos of a macaque and then of a dog basically looking at an animal that they think are dead or severely injured. The first one is a macaque. So it's a monkey in Southeast Asia who has been electrocuted. And you'll see in that image how the conspecific tries to, it does what it does, potentially to resurrect, bring that animal back. I can say I've seen 4 animals that have been basically electrocuted. And if you kind of palpate their hearts or kind of slap them around, they come back. If you don't, they die. So with that, I'll just let you watch it. So there's no video here, no sound here. That's the macaque. You can evaluate the video. This is kind of one of the famous kind of dog videos. There's tons and tons of them on YouTube. So these are the sorts of kind of videos that, you know, if you saw a human doing something like that, how would you interpret it relative to a monkey or a dog? Again, I just leave it up to you to kind of decide. Elephants are somewhat famous for basically showing kind of long-term responses to death. So this is probably an image of kind of a recent death. I've seen where I work in Kibale National Park in Uganda, elephants go back for years to the site where animals died, and they just basically walk around. They move bones, they walk around, they walk around. The whole area is trampled for years. I don't really know what that means. Is that mourning? You can kind of think about it yourself. So let me present one example to make you think about what kind of the second part of the statement means. People have always tried for centuries to state that humans are unique and what we're going to deal with right in the next video, superior to animals. But our definitions keep changing. So that was the statement I made very, very early. And let's see if this works. Oops, wait a minute. Okay, so let me just explain. Basically, this is research done in Japan. And what you'll see is numbers flash up on the screen. And then those numbers are replaced by boxes, kind of colored over boxes. And in this case, the chimpanzee has to basically follow the numbers by order. So he basically has to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. And sometimes numbers are missing. So maybe 1, 4, 7, that sort of thing. That's what's rewarded. When he is successful, you'll kind of hear a buzzer, and the animal gets a peanut. So this is done in Japan by a researcher called Matsuzawa. It's the Eye Project, and it's an amazing project. I was there all last fall, working kind of with that group, and you can judge for yourself. So it's first going to be the chimpanzee, and then you can compare it. You can compare it to start with in your mind to yourself, see how you can do, and then you can compare it to a grad student. Okay, so the chimpanzee. Success. Success. So one thing that's really, I think is really cool about that is the chimpanzee goes, hurry up, give me the next one. You can think about it too. So now we're talking about the grad student. So however you want to define grad students, I'll just leave it at that. Success. Failure. So one thing I can say is I would not do any better than the grad student. So what that suggests is that chimpanzees are better at some task. So when we define what makes humans superior, we choose the metrics that are important, that we think are important. So we're choosing our kind of what we want to say is superior. And that just doesn't work. So if anyone's ever seen a chimpanzee climb in a tree, you know that they are much superior to us. I once tried to catch a sloth in a tree. I shouldn't really continue the story, but sloths are superior to us, or to me. So chimpanzees have lots of different abilities, and some of them are superior to us, some of them are not. It's whatever you want to choose. If you wanted to make the statements about superiority, you'd have to do something like choose a random selection of traits. You can't choose the ones we want. That's what we've been doing for centuries. And kind of lastly, what we're basically doing is we're also kind of ignoring evolutionary theory. So, in general, science kind of believes in evolutionary theory. So, traits come from something before. So if it comes from something before, can it be unique, truly unique? It should be a development. It should not be something that's truly unique. And kind of we can think about that and how the things did things spontaneously generate. There was a kind of researcher that basically talked about spontaneous generation of wonderful traits, hopeful monsters. And are those sorts of traits? Up to you. So for a long time, scholars suggested that basically these ideas of uniqueness are flawed. So in 1871, basically the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great it is as it is, certainly is one of degree, not of one in kind. That was Darwin, over a century ago. So in terms of evolutionary theory, that's what you can think about. And this is something that was actually quite influential to me very, very early on. There's basically evidence that chimps have really good ability to use tools that dates back to the 1920s. And this is something I read as a teenager, and I still remember kind of reading it in my bed. This is a nice kind of thick book, and I have no idea why I read it as a teenager. But basically it describes all these sorts of kind of trials that this researchers did in the 1920s to challenge chimpanzees. And you can kind of just look at the picture. There might be cooperation there. There's definitely kind of the use of basically piling those boxes on top of each other. Tool use, up to you. Tool use, up to you. So these are the sorts of things that chimps were doing and they're described doing in 1925. Jane Goodall made kind of the world press by basically showing chimps use tools in the 1960s. Jane Goodall made press because National Geographic publicized it. So I worked for National Geographic for 9 years. The only reason she made press because the publicity that she got from it. And thus people said things changed. There's been evidence from at least the 1920s that says animals kind of using these sorts of tools. So people want to think basically that kind of we're unique from animals. I'm not going to speculate on why, because I don't understand it at all. But I'm going to speculate on what the consequences are. The consequences of people having a desire to call themselves unique from animals and other sorts of other people. Those sorts of consequences are things like this. This is a slaughter of elephants in Uganda where I work. So currently extinction rate are about 1,000 times higher than background rates. Something like, I have no idea how they get these numbers really, 11,000 to 58,000 species are lost annually. The living kind of species, extant vertebrate species, have declined in abundance by about 25% since 1970. This is a picture from from Kenya, where basically these are the elephant tusks that are being sold. Between 2000 and 2012, 2.3 million square kilometers of forest was lost, approximately the size of Mexico. Mexico is pretty big. If you try to drive across Mexico or down through Mexico, it's large. In the tropics, I think we often think that tropical deforestation, well, it's kind of a thing of the past. That's a thing of the 70s and 80s. In the tropics, deforestation has increased every year. 4 million metric tons of bushmeat were extracted from the Congo Basin. That's equal to about 4.5 million cows. And this is basically the back of a truck in Congo, just across the border from Uganda, where I work. This is how you normally would buy bushmeat in almost anywhere in Africa. So now I'm going to be a little bit radical. I'm just going to end this. This talk was developed with a bunch of different students, and they all told me that I had to be somewhat conservative coming in my end. So this was a kind of a process where I learned a lot from a bunch of different students that were really great. So we want to make categories. So we want to make categories of humans versus animals. So does that allow us to make atrocities against animals? Up to you to decide. Does these things allow us to make atrocities between other sorts of groups we want to define? So cultural groups. Quite frankly, I don't really know the difference between Protestants and Catholics, but they are killing each other. They were killing each other dramatically. We think of this, okay, well, this is something in the past. We defined these groups in the past. genocide. Basically the Holocaust was 6 million. Cambodia was 3 million. Rwanda, which is I was in that genocide, 1 million. We're continually making these sorts of, however you want to define it, atrocities. So the question would be, are we unique? I don't really know what unique is. One of the papers I suggested for this says the exact opposite of what I say. Are we unique? Yellow banana, green banana, I don't know. We can kind of think of what it could take us. And we can think about if we want to define ourselves unique, or want to define ourselves, or we want to define ourselves, what the consequences are. And with that, I'll just end and turn it over for questions.
I can shout. Oh, thank you, Dr. Chapman. That was very interesting.
Go closer to the mic.
Is that working? Okay. Oh, yes, I can hear myself. All right. Thank you for that talk. That was very interesting. Going back to the notion of conflicts between groups of chimpanzees, you mentioned that males that are found by the adversary would be killed and the females will be beaten up. Is that something that systematically happens, i.e. they do not necessarily kill females? And my other question would be, what happens to the females? Are they raped? Are they pushed away? And I was going to find a similarity with what's happening in warfare, where men will be killed and women can be necessarily killed but will be raped.
Interesting. I hadn't kind of thought of it from that perspective. Basically, in chimpanzee communities, males always stay at home. They don't disperse. So if you leave a male in a neighboring community, he's your competitor in the future. So males tend to be killed. Females are always moving. And something I don't understand is when these attacks happen, females are not raped. But females are only receptive. They only have sexual swellings during certain times for chimpanzees. So basically, unless you catch a female when she's sexually receptive, it's not going to help your reproductive success. So they don't rape females. They beat them up. But there is some tentative evidence that if you beat up a female, she'll then move to your community.
Okay, so they moved to the community that was attacking her group.
Yes.
Okay.
That's some evidence, kind of small, for both chimpanzees and spider monkeys who have a similar organization.
Okay. So there's a similarity with what's happening with, I think, mongoose, where you will have some form of warfare, but sometimes the females will actually go and breed with the males from the opposite group to gain genetic diversity.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I would like to know about your view of the definition of human as a religious animal. Some ritual behavior and funeral rites in animal are documented, but we don't know if they have a religious feeling or a spiritual transcendent experience, whatever. What do you think about the possibility of this kind of animal experience or feeling of something else? Whatever.
So I guess when I get a question I can't answer, I turn it back to the person who asked me. It's really a cruel thing to do. Sorry. So how would you say, if you watched a monkey or a dog, maybe people are more familiar, how would you say that it got the feeling that something was religious, something was a bigger spiritual thing?
I don't have any cue that you have some religious experience, but I would like to know about your view of the possibility that maybe elephants have a transcendent experience when they come on the field later after.
So you're going to make a very good professor So you just turned my mean question back on me. So yeah, skip the PhD. You just go for. I really don't know. I don't know what. I'm not overly religious, but I feel that there's something personally. But I really don't know how I'd say that an animal was feeling a religious experience. When I go into the forest, I have a feeling that I sit down on a rock and I have this wonderful feeling, but I don't know what it means, and I don't know how you would actually ever figure it out. So the answer is I have no idea.
Hi, my name is Najet, and thank you very much for the talk. So could one answer to the question, why do we want to think that we are different, could come from the language? In many cultures, the lack or absence of language means a cognitive or intellectual deficit. And we can find that in a lot of languages with the word mute, someone who can't talk, always is synonym to someone that is intellectually deficit.
Yep.
But also in a deeper level, maybe, could it be that humans are aware that some species are superior, so they are self-conscious of the vulnerability that they have? I wonder, without tools, how long can a human survive in a wild environment? So could it come from a need to feel that we are different too?
So lots of questions kind of bundled up in one question. I don't really. The thing to calling us unique would be to say that that animals don't have anything like what we have. And I think animals do have communication systems. I think you'll hear about that throughout if you haven't already heard about those sorts of things. We have a more elaborate one, and something that really, really helps us is the fact that we can transmit knowledge between generations more easily with our language and with writing things down. Unique. We have a language, they have a language. How many people can actually say what their dog's thinking when they go, I speculated about a bunch. Monkeys have tons of different calls. I know some of them, most people don't. So unique, you're not unique. I think it's hard to say. I think you had another couple of questions in there.
Yeah, the fact that humans could be self-aware of the vulnerability and being inferior, like in the wild, without any tools to animals. So that's why maybe we feel the need to emphasize the difference in spirit.
People have talked a lot about self-awareness. And again, I really don't quite know. And, as I said, what I'm bringing to this field or to this talk is a field biologist perspective. I can say they kind of know their relationships between other animals. They're aware of those relationships. That's self-awareness? I don't know. But basically, I once watched the first ranking male and the second ranking male have a fight. The second ranking male lost and kind of disappeared. He went up to the north. And, we all kind of knew he was up there. We'd see him every once in a while. But he was up to the north. And then one day, he basically appeared again in the group. And literally everybody went quiet. So they knew that there was this tension. They knew this animal was against that animal. Self-aware? I don't know. But they were all quiet. The second ranking male walked up to the first ranking male and kind of sat there. First ranking male looked at the other male, sat there. And then the second ranking male kind of put his foot out. First ranking male came over, groomed his leg, and everyone was happy. Or I shouldn't say that. The tension seemed to be removed. And, right now I'm going out on a limb. I would never say things like everybody's happy in a scientific paper. I had a feeling that the tension was removed. Can I show that? No. But animals started kind of going around their normal sorts of behaviors. I don't know what all that means. And is that anthropomorphic? Yes.
Thank you.
One really fun thing, I think, is that basically in the 1960s, the Japanese had a different view on science, and the Japanese were willing to accept anthropomorphisms. And it took North American science they were willing to say that animal A knew that that was animal B. So they said there's self-recognition, a bunch of other things. It took North American scientists 20 years to confirm that. Does that make one science better than another science? That's up to you to decide. It's different. We have our own assumptions, and it's all, on our cultural baggage too. So, and I totally admit the fact that I have my cultural biases because I have a corgi, and corgis are the best. It's my dog, and so Simon's laughing. He's met my dog. Basically, that's just my biases. And would I admit that in a scientific paper? Of course not. Would I admit that in a scientific conference? I think I just did, I guess. So, yeah. Let's go to the other side.
It's not that I admire the human species. So I'm not coming here to defend human uniqueness out of admiration at all. And you've given plenty of the reasons why there's nothing particular to admire there. And it's not about worrying about anthropomorphism, because I think anthropomorphism is one of our best scientific and conceptual tools for understanding other species. But there is something unique about human beings. And you sort of skirted it when you were talking about passive comprehension of 1,000 words by dogs. Language, this has come up before in this conference, language isn't just that. And it isn't just more of that. There's something unique about language, and the only one that has it is the human species. It's true that there's communication, there's no question. There's communication all the way down to invertebrates. But language is the capacity to say or gesture, it's not the modality, but to say or gesture anything and everything that can be said, to say it and to understand it. The form in which this particular observation came up was when we had the chimpanzee session a couple of days ago. And again, nobody could admire chimpanzees and non-human primates more than I do. The claims about their linguistic capacity are erroneous. They're erroneous. They understand. There's no question that there's understand. My dog understands when I head towards the door that we're going to go out.
Agreed,
so
yep.
Understanding is one thing, but the thing that you're doing now with my words is something else, and it's related intimately to production. You said they can't speak because they don't have voices. That's not the problem. It's not because they don't have voices. It's because they don't have language. If they had language, they would be here at this conference discussing this with us.
Okay, I'm just going to respond really simply and say, let's wait 50 years. And either, yes, we'll both be here 50 years now, and we'll see who's right. Man was the tool user. Let's wait 50 years. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. Hi, it's very interesting talk. Thank you very much. I think there's another side to the coin of genocide and destruction and all the evil of human beings. Like if we just, which is altruism and help behaviors. Like if we just look at what the Bill Gates Foundation is doing with the eradication of malaria and polio and all the help that they give in Africa and such. So is that kind of behavior seen as well on a smaller scale in animals? Like for a community to go out of their way to help another community?
Okay, let's think about it in a bit different perspective. And so this question versus the previous one, we're now having reasons to do that, help one community or another community. There's a global good. We realize that if humans don't do something, we're going to wreck our ecosystems. People are realizing these things. Does a dog realize these things? Well, a dog doesn't have to because they're not destroying the environment. So there's no selective pressure yet, or no real need to understand those things in those sorts of organisms. That's a cop-out with what I just said, because it just kind of avoided the question in a way. But I think we have to think about how we'd see these things and whether or not they would be under selection, whether or not we really want to understand. If you basically take human society back 100 years, there's very little cooperation between groups. Nowadays, that's becoming different. What that means, I'm not sure. I hope it increases, but I'm not sure. We have charities in Africa that I've established. We got money from Bill Gates, those sorts of things. But I think it's hard to say, and I don't know.
And I have just another question. It's
Sure.
about the capacity, the capacity for human beings to innovate. Like, as far as I know, we're the only ones that went to the moon, or to create all this, like to be able to have air conditioning, like to adapt. Like, with that ability to innovate, would be one criteria that separates us from animals.
It depends on your definitions. Have you ever, basically termite mounds are air conditioned. Termite mounds are basically irrigated so that they don't flood. Termite mounds are pretty elaborate, and they probably actually are better than most of our buildings, and they use a lot less energy. Bee nests, things like that. They're all, you can say, yes, they're unique, or you can say, well, no, they do a pretty good job too. We make tools. We make really fancy tools that make us unique. Animals make tools. Animals air condition. Are we unique? Are you a green banana or a yellow banana? I don't know.
Thank you.
Look at the video of Louis Lefebvre from yesterday. That was what the topic was.
Yep. So Louis was my postdoc supervisor. Louis and I get along extremely well. We always have. We argue intensively, which is really fun. But, let's go back this side.
Yes. The more we're doing research on animal, the more we're realizing how much we underestimate them and how much they are able to do so much more than we thought of them before. But do you feel, because you mentioned a lot the great apes, but do you feel that we always had a sort of bias for the great apes because they looked a lot like us and they are they're genetically very related to us? Or is it because of all those research on the great apes that they eventually got them the respect they have? Because I just feel like you did mention that we cannot define a trait and apply it to other animals, but I just feel like with great apes we see ourselves as a very, very intelligent monkey, and we're sort of telling them we are intelligent, therefore you are. So what is your opinion on that? And do you see other animal species eventually getting the respect that great apes are starting to get now?
Really good question. Again, I don't know how to answer it in many ways. Great apes have always gotten more attention. If you want to get a grant, work with great apes. There's one project in the park I work on that works on monkeys. That's mine. There's 4 that works with great apes. Those ones get more funding in the end because people are interested in them. If you go and sit in the middle of a chimpanzee community, I guess the thing would be maybe it's really, really easy to anthropomorphize. It's really easy to figure out what's going on. And I'm really stepping on a limb by saying, yeah, I kind of understand what's going on more. But I work on red collarless, which is a leaf eater. And after 10 years, I kind of got a good feeling for what's going on or when the fight's going to happen. People are interested in great apes. It's easier to comprehend great apes. Maybe it's because we, intuitively understand facial expressions, or I don't know. I just don't know.
Thank you.
Sure.
So as everyone has seen so far, I guess language is really the issue in this summer school. And I would just like to come back to your comment. I don't know your name, I'm sorry. But you asked whether how long would we survive without tool use? And I think the same could be applied to cognition in our species and language. How long would we survive if we wouldn't be able to tell each other all of these information? Would we be able to stay as a group like this? Will we beat each other up? I don't know. And I would like to illustrate another thing with a non-cognitive example. Let's talk about the evolution of the eye, for example, which Richard Dawkins explains very well in, I think, his book, The Blind Watchmaker. So basically, there are different stages of the evolution of the eye, which you have maybe, let's just say, a patch that can tell the difference between light and shadow, and then there's a cup, and then that cup closes itself gradually, really gradually, so that you can tell the direction of the light more easily. And then you have the lens that comes up on it, and you can call it a full eye. So let's say our eyes are good, but let's say that the eagle's eye might be better. And let's give another example of, Richard Dawkins calls it the pinhole camera, which is a basic eye, quote unquote. And I think squids have this kind of eye, a pinhole, and it survives just as well with that kind of eye. And I think we can make the same argument with cognition. And let's give another example. I think it's the mantis shrimp that can detect 9 different colors with their eyes, and we can detect only 3. Should we give more value to that kind of eye? Should we give less value to the pinhole eye? The same thing can be said of cognition. Should we give less value to the chimpanzees that have a theory of mind, but not a full theory of mind, as some authors would argue? And language might just be, something that we really needed for that. And the capacity, as Stephen said, of, giving all of this information, being able to tell really everything, might be a byproduct of maybe a simpler mechanism that could be able to tell us, okay, well, what do you think of this individual which has a higher reputation in the group? I'm talking in terms of more simpler social interactions in early hominins. So, it's just maybe just a comment, but maybe we can reflect on that.
I think in general, these are really good thoughts. And what do we want to call unique? What do we call superior? And why? I guess that's why I kind of titled the talk what I did is, why do we want to say we're unique? I'm quite happy to be inferior. And maybe some of you will agree after the talk, but I'm quite happy not to be the best.
Hi. You showed a lot of examples, but it seems to me as there is a fundamental difference with the attitude in which we do the diverse activity. As for art, we do art for the sake of art. We don't do art for having some food afterward. And going back to the trees, where I suppose the chimps really want to be. And even for the language, as Stephen said, it seems as if there's some kind of attitude that is unique to the man, a propositional attitude, an attitude toward art. And even if we if we were the tool user way long ago, it seems as if this attitude is what makes us unique.
So I guess I'll again be a professor and say, why does a chimpanzee do art? Why does a chimpanzee do tools? Why is he using a computer? Maybe it's going to increase reproductive success.
Well, I guess the easy answer is that I suppose that there's a récompense. Yeah, there's a reward afterward for doing it.
So why are you talking to me? Is there not a reward after this?
Intentional, it's propositional to
Yeah.
want a reward.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I suppose there's a reward for doing it, and it's not for the sake of it, as it seems that we do.
I think we do a lot of things for rewards.
Yeah, I think too. But
that we may not think of them as rewards.
yeah, but you showed art is a great example, I think, of an activity that we do for the sake of it. It's not.
Yeah, I don't know. I like to show off my art to, people. And if I was younger, I'd say for my reproductive success, I must admit. But probably it's not going to help me anymore. But I wonder why we do these things. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that again. And, here I'm stepping way out of a limb, and I'm kind of doing that to encourage people to think. But, how can we say a chimpanzee does it for a reason other than what we do it for?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
I don't have a question exactly, but what I understood from your presentation is that it's no longer appropriate to ask about the distinctive feature of human, but what makes us similar. Yes, and that's involved. It's involved in the term in the title of your presentation. But why we want to see like different animals? Yeah, and I think there was a great philosopher that made this kind of Descartes' contemporary, Spinoza. And many people today, many philosophers today, believe that he had a kind of anticipation of some biology questions. Stuart Hampshire, Deleuze, many philosophers, not many, but some philosophers today think this way. And he understood beings with difference in degrees or not in quality differences. And I think the his ethics, it's a great book for us today. It's a difficult one, but I think we need to review Spinoza.
So I'm going to be the first person to say that I'm not a philosopher. We have philosophers in the room. I've read a little bit, but I'm not one. I'm a field biologist. I have a lot to learn about philosophy. I like dabbling in ideas, and I think we all should. What I'd kind of challenge people to wonder is the last part of my talk. And the students that I was kind of developing this talk with over the term always said, Colin, don't do that. Don't do it too much. But, if we're not unique, if we're not superior, maybe does that matter if we're doing atrocities? If we're doing atrocities against animals, against other people, that seems to me to be the critical thing? I don't know. This is a field biologist again, and it's a field biologist perspective.
Yes.
But I think we need to involve lots of people who can think about these things more. People who have thought more about philosophy. I've sat in the field and been swarmed by army ants and cursed on ants and ticks that I got, and those are my experiences. But I watched them in the field. So I think we need to think more broadly.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a quick question and then a comment. The quick question is, on these chimp patrols, do they take and hold territory or food resources or anything like that, or is it just messing with the other group?
They hold food resources.
So is this a factor in territory enlargement for
Probably,
groups?
yeah.
And it can lead to the extinction of one group?
Yes, it can.
Yeah, okay.
For sure, it has done.
So this is not just a sort of proto behavior. This has a lot of the same factors of human intergroup violence. Okay. My comment is, so in the question of sort of categorical difference or uniqueness or superiority in whatever register we want to put that into for humans, there seems to be a question of merit bound up with that, quite apart from a question of functional distinctions. And I think it might be the case that humans are categorically unique and superior, but that doesn't bring with it any merit. Sort of, yes, we're a bunch of genociders who can fly to the moon. Maybe it's a wash morally. But I think the language capacity, which is unique as opposed to other forms of communication, because those other forms of communication are largely or uniquely ostensive. And so what abstract language allows us to do is communicate about objects that have been in any previous environment with other human communities. So it basically opens up every phenomenon that our language sharing conspecifics have experienced, which is, if that's a matter of degree, it's the biggest degree I've ever seen. But I think that right there is sort of a quantum leap in social communication ability, and it's any ostensive communication, as good as it is, simply cannot touch that ability for geometrically expanding the amount of culture we can share.
Okay, let me jump in there. I agree and disagree. So if you want to say we have better language, yes. If you want to say we have way better language, yes. If you want to say that there's no language before, I'd say not really. The ability to communicate language or communicate ideas between generations, I think, is a huge advantage. Does that make us unique? Your green banana, yellow banana. Sure, it makes us really, really different. And hopefully we can use those differences for something good.
Just one, you were talking about the Japanese having a different mindset, at least in the 60s and 70s. There was a previous speaker who talked about Japanese researchers and animal shelter workers being quite comfortable seeing the human-trained primates as a sort of hybrid, it's very different from anything you'd find in the wild. It's this chimpanzee genes and body plus human culture hybrid that you'd have to treat differently. And would you subscribe to that sort of category difference?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So who talked about that?
I forget, but it was very interesting.
Okay. About culture? He was talking about culture, things like potato washing. Okay. In many ways, I agree. A chimpanzee in captivity that's basically grown up with a human. So which is the chimp in Japan, who Matsuzawa basically took home every night, and he's very, very proud of. He basically took him over every night to his family. Is very different than a chimpanzee grown up in the wild.
Hi, Colin. Going back to Darwin's citation, do you feel that the difference in feelings is a matter of degree as well?
Difference in feelings?
Yeah.
I guess what she's trying to say is love and these kind of things.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, like, do we accept to admit that other species have feelings? Or are we still debating that? And if we're not still debating that, do we see this difference between humans and non-humans as a matter of degrees when it comes to different feelings?
I will just kind of, I think my slowness in answering, because I don't really know. I've seen things like jealousy, if I anthropomorphize. I really don't know.
But your dog, when you come home, would you say your dog is happy to see you?
Of course, he has to be, because I want him to be happy. But yeah, I don't really know, but he's really unhappy when I leave. If I'm sick, he comes sits by me in the bed. If I throw up, he comes sits beside me by the toilet. But those are all kind of me being very totally anthropomorphic. But it's a good question.
Yes, it's hard to get an answer, and I think the general feeling I have so far is that, and I understand, because I'm a biologist, I'm trained in biology as well, that there's a real reluctance in discussing this issue of feelings. And I've read books on animals' feelings, and we're still not quite ready to say that.
One thing I kind of
interesting.
throw back at people is, how would you know that your dog was happy?
Okay.
Well, I'm asking
So you could register stress levels, that sort of thing.
Colin, there have been sessions in this summer school on that question. In fact, the premise
Great. Let me have a look.
The premise for the summer school is the other minds problem. Descartes already said, and before Descartes, that you can't know for sure. But answer me a puzzle, especially you, because I know you don't mean it. You say it and you don't mean it. Why do scientists, quote unquote, because I'm not convinced that it's a separate species, it's just people putting on a certain hat. Why do scientists say stupid things like, I'm not sure my corgi is happy to see me because I'm a scientist?
Okay, scientists are scared to say things like, my corgi isn't happy to see me. Because we're scared of what our peers will say to us. And
okay, so we have peers in the room.
My corgi is happy to see me. There you go.
I'm just curious, because this is an ongoing debate that hasn't been discussed. So welcome.
I think that's a really good question, though, because we are scared as academics. We don't want to be attacked by other academics, and we don't really have data. How do we get data? So we're scared.
I mean, I would offer that the challenge is that your peers will immediately dismiss you, because everyone in science knows that the domain of science is the intersubjective. And so as soon as you say, my feeling about my corgi is such and such, you're taking it out of the domain of the intersubjective. And no scientist wants to play that game or is interested in playing that game. Some are interested in playing that game.
Yeah.
But in general, other scientists will say, well, you're talking about subjectivity. Science is intersubjective. Get with the program and don't talk nonsense.
I agree. I'd flip it around and criticize myself even more. I'm in a stage in my career that if people criticize me, I don't really care. I'm not going to get,
You have tenure.
So I'm fine. So go ahead and criticize me. So why am I still scared? My corgi is the happiest dog in the world. So I think you're right. It's kind of ingrained in us to be scared of these things, and I don't really know. I don't know. Really good perspective. So I'll take that from you guys.
We've been doing neuroscience for a while now, and I would argue that we actually have evidence that animals have emotions. What is happiness? Or rather, what happens in the brain when we're happy, when we consider ourselves happy? So let's say there's a hormone that is released. If we can see that in the dog, when you get back home, for example, and we can see in the brain that there's this same hormone, the same mechanisms that happen. Why can't we say that the dog is happy? Why can't we say that the dog is afraid? So I guess I would argue that we have evidence for that. And to come back to the idea of, again, language and art, yeah, we do art. Yes, we have better cognitive capabilities. So yes, we are unique because of that. This is what makes us unique, and bipedalism and all that. But the beaver is just as unique, not in terms of cognitive capabilities. Well, maybe he has a better spatial memory because of trees, or I don't know anything about beavers, but maybe he has some better capabilities in specific areas. The chimpanzees, as we've seen on the video, he's better at, giving the order of the numbers pretty quickly, and he has better, instant memory. So yes, we are unique, but the beaver is just as unique, and the chimpanzee is just as unique, and the raccoon is just as unique. At least that's my opinion. So are we unique? Of course we are, but every species is unique, and that's why we're doing that separation. Why is this a species and not these three species together? Well, that's because they are all unique. They have all different traits.
Well, I must admit, I've learned more about myself and all my biases from this talk than I thought I would. And thanks for the challenges. Those are really kind of good things that I have to look in the mirror and say, what are you thinking? And why?
Maybe I just want to make a point about objectivity and subjectivity in science, and to follow Stephen's question about the scientific fear to admit that animals have something like sentience. I don't think we have any link to objectivity in science, and like Husserl did in its phenomenological theory, whatever. The objectivity is only attained by intersubjectivity. We agree, all of us, about something, and because we have all the same perspective about the thing, we admit this thing as having something like objectivity. So if we all agree that animals are sentient, why we still have this fear to admit this like a fact?
So I'm going to flip this around and maybe answer the question that was posed to me. Why are we scared of doing this? So I come from a background of anthropology, biology. If, some of you are younger than me, most of you are younger than me. If you were going up for a job and you wanted to say, I believe this, you probably wouldn't get the job. If you wanted to go up for tenure, you probably wouldn't get tenure. So I would suggest is that it's time for academia to change its perspectives, to be a little bit more open-minded. I make the argument all the time for conservation, but I never thought of applying the argument to these sorts of questions. But I think there is really good reasons not to make these arguments if you're a junior person. And then once you become like me, your mind is set and you just kind of go along. But I think it's a really good comment to think we should be thinking differently. But academia has to change. And who should change that perspective, I guess, would be I don't know.
I would differ. I think we can accept this point and say that it points in a certain direction, which is how do you get something from restricted to subjectivity into the intersubjective? And the answer is, in brief, invent a rule stick. So you have a way to measure mass, we can make mass intersubjective. You have a way to measure sentience that everybody can look at the yardstick and say, 3 on the sentience scale, you make it intersubjective. So long as you only will say, I have a feeling, and not give me a measurement or something that other people can look at and say, yes, then we are stuck. But it doesn't say that this point is valid. Quite the contrary. It says this is the path to take it from subjectivity to intersubjectivity.
I 80% agree with you, but I'm an ecologist. So basically, if someone went back this year and repeated the study I did last year and found differences, they would never say I was wrong. They'd say interannual variation. The rainfall was 10 centimeters different this year than last year. So I wonder how much our metrics are really good. So, if we can make those metrics, wonderful. But sometimes I think our metrics are just to make us feel comfortable. So anyone who repeats any of my studies and shows a difference cannot say that difference is because I was wrong. And he's going to challenge me, which is fun.
I don't understand that point. You're saying there's variation. Of course, there's going to be variation. There's always variation in replication. Question is it a flat Gaussian or is it a peaky Gaussian? If it's flat, then maybe you've got a bad approach.
Yep.
It's a peaky one. Well, that's what we expect. That's what always occurs.
So I do my study year one.
It's a distribution.
And we don't find it year two. So that person should repeat it for 10 years to show the distribution. The person's definitely not
that gets into tricky issues of, is it cyclical? If it's on a 10-year cycle, then maybe yes. And there's lots of biological phenomena that has decade-long cycles. Like there's animals that hatch on decade-long cycles. So you have to say whether or not the
then
process
you just say, okay, climate change for succession.
There's no problems there.
But you have to have a 20-year study to be able to prove me wrong.
It depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at sea level, you need 2 years. If you're looking at CO2, the variance is clearly beyond what is expected over time domains of 5 to 10 years. So it depends on the variable.
I guess I'm just saying with the types of research I do, it's going to take you a decade to show that.
Sure, but that's fine. But that's different from saying, I don't know if numbers really apply here.
In the right mind would take that 10 years.
I think we've gone a little off topic over
Yeah,
here.
we have.
Okay. But let me get back to the point where it veered off into what to do with data. The reason the other minds problem is a problem is because of the frequently proposed solution that's come up in the last few minutes is not a solution. Correlates of feeling are not feeling. Greg Burns was here, the first talking about jealousy in dogs, and he was talking in terms of brain activity that correlates with, in structures that correlate with when dogs act as if they're jealous, etc. But we know that feelings really are felt, and it's not just correlates between behaviors and brain structures. So the other minds problem stays in place, even if we say, in order to please my peers, when I say my dog is happy, I'm really just saying that, that there's some activity in his whatever nucleus. That's not what you mean by happy.
Hi. So I'm flipping the question around. Like throughout history, where we were part of the food chain circle, like animals would eat us, and we would eat animals, and that type of stuff. And now we have moved at the top of the food chain, or even out. Depends on the perspective, and usually, but usually, if you see a polar bear in the wild, it's the last thing that you see. He will eat you. So, aren't we acting towards animals the same way that they would act towards us, to a certain extent, so that we're not unique, or that we're the same?
So yeah, I'd agree with that in many ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Let's use our imagination, and we see aliens coming down. Okay. So, and they're way more sophisticated than us, much more different than us with the chimps or animals in general. And they look at us and they think, well, we're just a nuisance because basically we're destroying our environment and the animals' environment. So how would we defend our case so they don't extinguish us?
The answer would be, I don't know. I can't remember where I ever heard this story, but if the aliens came down, they basically watched us going to a ski resort, They'd watch us getting in line, going up the top of the hill, racing down to get in line again. And they would say the motivation was to get in line. So how do we do those sorts of observations to say why? And in terms of, if I was alien evaluating what we're doing, that's, I don't know.
Do you think they would assume we still deserve to keep on going?
Let's hope so.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to come back briefly to the point about using a yardstick for third personal measure for the presence of people. We use the word sentience, but I think consciousness is probably the more familiar term. We already have measuring sticks for consciousness. We just don't apply them to animals, or we haven't figured out, I don't think, what the right way to do that is. There's a pretty well-developed cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience branches of those fields that focus on consciousness in humans. And there's a parallel debate that I think in that field that it occurs to me might be relevant to the study of sentience in animals, and it's whether to use third personal measures or to rely strictly on report, where report is understood as either verbal assent or pressing a button. Again, I don't know off the top of my head if there's a straightforward way to apply those metrics to study of animals that can't understand, laboratory instruction. But it seems to me that there's a parallel kind of methodological concern, and at least the mere fact that what we're talking about is subjectivity might not be the problem in itself.
I can just kind of bow my head and say that I can't really comment on it. It's a field that I think needs thinking about, but that's not my expertise. But yeah, fun.
Well, I think we're out of time, and I would like to thank you all for this very stimulating conversation, discussion, and I invite you to thank Colin Chapman with me.